Oh, the thing I didn't mention too, they don't give homework. And you're not being tested.
Wait, there's no homework?
There's not homework.
Not a single thing that they ask you to do
home,
at home?
you just play.
Oh, my.
You just go home and play and be with your family.
What
and
a
eat
novel
dinner.
idea.
And wow.
All right, welcome to this episode of Under the Oak. I'm really excited about this episode because in our previous one, we really dived into what Waldorf is and how we're inspired by it and why we're inspired by it. But we are lucky to have Star, who grew up going to a Waldorf school, and then she went to public school. So she has really cool insight into what it was like to be a student at a Waldorf school. So we're going to dive into seeing all of her awesome stories and insights with that. So with that, go ahead and tell us a little bit about what it was like to be at a Waldorf school.
Yeah, I'm excited to share this. On our very first podcast, I had mentioned it, and I actually, one of the feedback I got from our very first podcast was like, talk about that, talk about the difference, because I'm going to share a little bit about what it was like to go to Waldorf school. And since hopefully you've already listened to part 1 of this series, so you understand what Waldorf is, some of this might not make sense because I'm not going to go back and explain all of that in this episode. So just so you know, if you want all the context for this episode, listen to the last episode. But when we did that first podcast, one of the moms texted me and was like, you need to talk more about that. You need to talk about what that was like going to a Waldorf school and then transitioning to a public school. So I think it'd be fun to start at the beginning. I did 2 years of early childhood in Waldorf. So that is basically kindergarten, but 2 years of kindergarten. And Waldorf's kindergarten is lovely. It is so simple. You play outside, you play inside, you bake things, you do life skills, you hang out.
Would you say that you have a lot of like treasured core memories from that time?
It was so fun. I do remember getting dropped off my first day. And I was very sad.
Oh, sad time.
So that was scary. I remember like grabbing my mom, and I remember she gave me like her keychain to like remember me by.
That's
like
so
to hold on to while I was in class. So that part was a little scary at first when I first went, but it ended up being such a lovely experience. I don't think I could have gone to a better school. The school I went to was a Waldorf school in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So if you're familiar with Waldorf or Michigan, I went to the Rudolf Steiner School there, and it was lovely. So I did 2 years of early childhood. I had the same teacher, and they actually, after the first year, some children only do 1 year, but it's very common in Waldorf education to do 2 years, and they often recommend it. So for me, after my first year of kindergarten, they recommended, I think she should definitely do another year.
And then do you just repeat the same thing?
You just do the same thing.
Okay.
And because I don't think it's very intensely, there's not a lot of intense
repetition can be good.
Repetition in that way. It's mostly playing. It's mostly interacting with peers. It's baking bread. It's painting pictures. It's very, very simple. In today's curriculum, in today's society, it might be more of like a preschool vibe. But I'm 35, so 30 years ago. Oh my God.
We'll go ahead.
I was at school 30 years ago.
We'll breeze past that.
So 30 years ago, it was a lot of playing and a lot of hanging out. I turned out just fine. But I loved it. I made some really lovely friends. I did 2 years of it. And then they actually recommended I do a 3rd year of kindergarten. I don't know what that was about. But my mom was like, no, she's going to 1st grade. We're done with kindergarten. So I moved on to kindergarten. One thing I will note is there was a period in kindergarten when I did want to start learning to read. I was interested in it.
Oh, are we coming upon my favorite story?
No, that's coming later. And I didn't, they didn't teach it at that time. So that was one reflection. My mom was like, I kind of felt like, had I probably been homeschooled, I would have been able to follow that interest at that time. But because I was in Waldorf kindergarten, they didn't teach me to read then. I'm a great reader. I learned how to read in second grade. That's when they taught us in Waldorf school, was in second grade. But that was one thing about kindergarten that maybe you could say was negative, I guess, is that, but I think that's any school. You can't really accommodate every single child uniquely.
Totally.
So had I been homeschooled, maybe I would have learned to read sooner. But then I went into first grade, and we mentioned this in the podcast before. In first grade is when you get a new teacher. So in kindergarten, you have an early childhood teacher. In first grade, you get a new teacher. But that teacher that I got in first grade stays with you throughout the rest of the year. So the rest of the time that I was in Waldorf school, I had this same teacher, and I loved
and
this
the same
teacher.
Students with you as
and
well,
the same
right?
students. So
Unless
you
they
go
moved
into a first grade. So in kindergarten, there was actually, because Waldorf is pretty common for early childhood, and there was a couple kindergarten classes, but then the kids that actually move into first grade, I think that in our school, there was only one first grade. And that's also why it was hard. It's a private school. It was hard to get into. There's a limited amount of spots available, because once you go into first grade, you're going to keep going with those same
That makes
kids
sense.
throughout the year. So if you plan on doing Waldorf, you're going to start hopefully in the beginning, and you're going to go throughout it in the same class. It's hard to start. I think it's harder to start like midway in like third grade after going to traditional school.
Oh, yeah.
So I got my teacher, Mr. Hill. I have memories, like he was so cool. Waldorf teachers usually know how to play instruments. They know how to draw and paint. They're very artistic people that go into Waldorf teaching. And so my teacher, his name was Mr. Hill.
Shout out.
Shout out, Mr. Hill. He, every morning when we would walk into class, he'd be sitting playing the guitar.
Oh my
like
gosh.
as we all are like walking in, and he'd be singing. So he'd be like singing and playing. When I remember this time when I was a kid, I loved that song, Me and Julio, Down by the Schoolyard. You remember that song? You guys know that song?
Nope.
Well,
do you want to give us a little taste of it?
No. There is a good whistling part, and maybe we'll whistle it for you later. But so Mr. Hill, I have this memory of walking in the class, and that song was pretty popular at the time, 30 years ago. 30s. And I remember him like playing guitar and singing it, and I walked into class, and it was my favorite song, so I started singing it with him, and he and I were like singing this song, playing guitar together, and we just had it was at it was in first grade when I first started to know this teacher, and we just instantly had like a really good connection. I always felt very like special and looked after, and I don't know if I did not feel that way in public school later on in life. I did not feel that I had like a special looked after connection with my teachers in public school. I felt kind of like one of the herd, you know? But in Waldorf school, I felt very, I don't know, loved or special, or, not in a weird way in any way, just that I was important.
Yeah. Okay, so now that you're talking about being in first grade of Waldorf, can you kind of give us a little bit more of what that was like to be a first grader in a Waldorf education?
Yeah, so in general, one of the cool things is that for each subject, you make your own book.
Oh.
So instead of getting a textbook that you carry around,
you make it?
Make your own book.
Gosh,
so
okay.
It's really neat. You either get given these like books like those that we have, but bigger, or you just like make your own and you hole punch and tie it together. But so for each subject, you make this book. So every day when you walk into class, maybe not every day the board was different. Maybe every week the board was different. But those Waldorf blackboards we mentioned in the last episode, when you walk into class, there would be this gorgeous, elaborate, beautiful picture drawn with chalk on the chalkboard that could be erased. That's what's so amazing about it. It's like, you just erase this. It's not, they spend all this time creating these beautiful chalkboard pictures. So I remember each week we'd walk into class and there'd be a new picture on the board. And whatever that picture was representing what we were learning that week. And so it was cool. You walked in, you see, we're learning about Native Americans this week. Or whatever it might be. We're learning about the letter A and angels. And so then you have your own book, and part of class is to literally draw what you see on the chalkboard. So we would draw our own version of whatever that was. And then you would do some like writing next to that. What he would write on the board, maybe whatever it is that we were trying to learn about that subject.
Totally.
So you're drawing and you're writing. And so you're getting it on all different levels. And then the teacher would be like telling a story about it.
Okay.
So he would engage us in a story about whatever it is, the topic that we were learning about.
Wow.
And one of the cool things is Waldorf teachers are very creative. And so like I've read somewhere that their goal is to like make you laugh and cry in the same story. And so they would be expressively telling us about something and
engaging
us,
right?
Engaging us about something. And some people don't realize when you get into the grades, you are like sitting at desks, you know, so there's however many of us, 20 of us sitting at desks. There's a blackboard. There's a teacher up front. It looks traditional in that way. I mean, the classroom is more beautiful. It looks more like this, but you are sitting at desks listening to a teacher. But like I said, there's storytelling. You're doing art. You're being engaged. Your senses in so many levels. You're singing songs. You're learning verses.
Wow.
So that's all the stuff we were doing in first grade. And then by the end of the unit, they usually do things in blocks. So instead of like you learn 7 subjects per day, there's like a block.
Oh, okay.
So this block, we're learning how to tell time.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And so you're learning how to tell time for 2 weeks.
Oh my. Okay.
And
that
then
makes way more
over.
sense than
and then
trying to be like
different,
like rapid fire. Yeah.
So I think that's kind of interesting too. And
it probably lets things like sink in more.
Yeah.
And gives time for the kids to be able to absorb it too. That's really cool. I love that.
One of the things I remember really well, and this goes into, I think, second grade, is that in second grade is when you learn how to read. And for the year, there would usually be like a general topic. So maybe all of second grade, we were learning about Native Americans. And that was being woven into all of our different units and lessons.
Okay.
And they would do that with different things like Greek mythology. You're learning all about that in fourth grade. And that's woven into all of your lessons maybe. And there was also things like we would do plays.
Oh.
So each year or each unit or each block.
What play do you remember being in? Do you remember?
Yeah. There was one.
Because now I'm going to ask like what character you were.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I don't remember even the name of it, but I was a part of a 2-headed person. So we had a costume.
Were you connected? Oh, God.
Costume together.
I love
Sorry,
that.
I went away from the mic, but we were in the costume together and we would act out these plays.
Okay, now here's another side question with the plays. Were the costumes already made or... Was there some parts where you had to make them?
I think we did make some of our own and handwork.
Doing it all together?
I didn't even mention handwork yet either. There's always handwork. That's always incorporated. Yeah. So even though you do these blocks for different lessons, for different main lessons, you have handwork class, I think, every day.
Okay.
So you are learning how to felt balls. You are learning how to crochet, how to knit, how to sew. All of that is incorporated into your everyday. And I do think you do some of that in early childhood too. I think you're doing handwork, but it's simpler. It's like finger knitting and things like that.
Yeah.
So handwork is a big part of it. So you have main lessons and then you have classes like handwork. And there's also eurythmy. Eurythmy is a weird one. I wasn't a big eurythmy fan. Sorry, Waldorf.
That sounds like a word that I would try to stumble over.
It is like a dance class.
Okay. Like a movement?
It's weird. Have you ever heard of Tai Chi?
That sounds familiar, but I don't know if I can.
It's kind of like... it's just like
now we're in the praying mantis
it's like
pose.
And Rudolf Steiner had some philosophy behind why eurythmy was really good for children. And maybe I'm just... Nancy about it, but it wasn't really my thing. Eurythmy was a little weird, but you do things like that. You have a eurythmy class, a handwork class.
So you won't be starting an Acorn School eurythmy class.
There won't be an Acorn School eurythmy class. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm sure there's value in it, so I don't mean to talk crap. but I'm a little bit talking crap because it wasn't my thing. But you do have these different classes throughout the day, but you have basically a main block, is what I kind of mentioned before. Yeah. And throughout the year in that main block, you have an overarching theme.
Okay.
And so in second grade, the overarching theme was Native Americans. And so that was kind of woven into most of our stories, revolved around Native American stories. And that's also when you learn how to read, was in second grade. So this is a pretty big year for us. I remember it pretty significantly. Our property, the school had this beautiful property in Michigan. And it snows, so you play outside in the snow, or it's nice weather and you play outside. We built a traditional teepee.
Oh,
as second graders, and
like together,
a traditional wigwam.
Oh my gosh, like
on the
life-sized?
Huge.
Oh wow.
The wigwam was bigger than this classroom.
Oh.
With sticks.
That's
like we
so
built
cool.
this. And so it was cool. Like there was ways that the history.
And then did you just take it down when you were done?
No, it just lives on the property. It's probably. I wonder if it's still there. That wigwam might still be on the property. If it was, I built that. But it's cool. So they do a lot of ways to incorporate those larger lessons into different things. This is the story you love. So we learned how to read.
This is my favorite story.
This is Emilyrose's favorite story. It's a really cool story about Waldorf education.
Maybe it's just like the teacher in me, but I just loved this. This was so cool.
It's like the definition of holistic education versus it's like holistic medicine versus Western medicine.
Yeah.
Is kind of what this exemplifies, in
with
my opinion.
An education spin. So, okay, here we go.
So when I was learning how to read in second grade, I was showing signs of dyslexia. I was confusing my B's and my D's, and I could not figure it out, and I was struggling. And what they did is they would bring me off into like a special office or something, and they would practice with me and have me draw things. And one of the things that they did was they talked to my mom, and they asked her, did she ever crawl as a baby? And my mom was like, actually, no. So I was one of those babies that went from like sitting up to, we had walkers in the 90s, and your parents would plop you in a walker and you would like zoom around the house. And so I was in a walker as a baby all the time, and I went straight to walking. I never crawled. So I went straight from like the sitting development. I never did the crawling, and then I just walked all around.
Yep.
And so that walker helped me just move straight into walking. So when I was learning how to read, there is a part of your brain that develops through crawling. That motion of, this and the crossover motion is a really important part of brain development that I never had because I never crawled. So what's so cool is that the teachers identified this, and they asked my mom, and they brought her in. Did she ever crawl? No. Mm-hmm. So what they did was they had me crawl around the school as a second grader. I was crawling around the school, and I don't know for how long or how often I did it. And then they also had me do certain like drawing things. I don't know. But they totally healed it. Yeah. I do not have dyslexia at all. I didn't have to adopt that as a label and a disability for the rest of my life, because they knew about brain development and they knew about child development, and they didn't just label me as like,
and they worked with your mom,
and they worked with my family. Yeah. And I wasn't just labeled as, oh, you are,
good luck with reading, Star.
Yeah. Like you have a disability.
Yeah.
And you can't read well, and you'll probably never do A, B, and C.
Yeah.
And so I don't have a reading disability. And I'm so grateful for that level of holistic education, you know, that was really considered for me. So yeah, it was great. There was a lot of things like that. I loved the plays. I loved the festivals. I loved the May Day festival.
Oh, I was just about to ask you what your favorite one was.
Yeah, so we would make flower crowns and do the maypole dance and dress up, and your families come to the festivals. So, your families are there, and it was so fun to me. And actually that May Day festival is probably, that core memory is probably one of the biggest motivations for Acorn School. Mm-hmm. And maybe
we had our very first May Day festival. And I knew out of like all of the festivals, we had to make that one extra special because that was one that meant the most to you.
Yes, it meant so much to me. I'll try to put that in this podcast somewhere, like or on the website page. My mom just sent me last week a picture of me at the
At the festival?
At that
Do you
festival.
have a flower crown
when I was
on?
a kid. I have a flower crown on,
my
and I have a cute
gosh.
dress. I'm so 90s.
I'm going to have to
It's
see
like
that.
super cute. So I will try to get that picture because it was the inspiration, those memories, and also the winter festival. We did a bazaar in the school. They transformed the whole school, all the hallways, into a bazaar, and everybody had booths where they sold like adorable handmade Waldorf things. And it was so fun. I just remember being a kid, like walking through my school bazaar and like the smells and the feeling. It just was magical. All of it. The playing outside, the fairies, the gnomes, everything was just a childhood of beauty and magic. And, I loved going to school every day. It was so fun.
Wow.
And so that memory, all those memories were so the motivation for this, because I was like, I want my kids to have that same Waldorf magic that I had when I was growing up. And I just knew that I couldn't create that on my own. I knew that you needed a community.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not going to do a maypole festival by yourself, You're not going to do these things all alone.
You could, but it definitely is more fun with the community.
Yes, it's so much more fun. So that's kind of where this stuff came from. Before we move on to public school, do you have any other questions about?
Oh, about the Waldorf school
experience? Mm-hmm.
I think the only other question that I can think of was more, I want you to like just kind of encapsulate like the feelings that you had before you move on to public school about being in your classroom with your teacher and the other students. I know you said that you really felt special and loved like with the teacher, but how was it with your like peers?
I had great friends.
Okay.
I had really wonderful friends.
Was it also nice knowing that you would see them again next year
instead of didn't know any different.
Yeah,
that's true. Any different. Like, I'm not going to know who my friends are next year or what's going to happen. I had no idea. Those were my friends, and they were lovely. They were such sweet kids. We had so much fun. We had a whole imaginary worlds that we played in every day when we got to go outside and do that. So that was lovely. And they also did all the different classes. I forgot to mention, we also did foreign language.
Oh.
So, what
language?
We did French and German.
Goodness. Okay.
So,
and how would they incorporate that? Oh, okay.
So what's interesting is like for 1 month, we had German every day.
Okay.
And then the next month we had French every day.
Whoa.
And then the next month it was back to German. And so you get immersed in it, and then you do something else and get immersed in it again.
Have you retained any of that?
I remember how to count to like 100 in German.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
It's a really weird talent. I know a little bit of French. And when I went to public school later on, I took French. That was the thing I took. So you do that, and then you also learn a strings instrument. When you're younger, you do like wind instruments. So we did like recorders.
Just the recorders. Oh, goodness.
We did recorders. I tried to get Emilirose to like do recorders at the beginning of Acorn School.
Yes, she was like, ooh, like what if we did recorders? And like, I'm the one that would have to be doing the recorders, and to me that sounded like the worst nightmare of all time. I love recorders, and I think they're cute when I'm not the one having to teach it.
When you explained it to me, I was like, that makes sense.
Yeah, I just feel like it would need more time.
Yes.
Recorders, like if you're going to do it, you got to do it right with the recorders. And like when I was in elementary school, not to take a tangent, but I loved music class with the recorders. Like our teacher would even have different colored strings when we would pass a different level. We could tie it onto our recorder. So I feel like that was really fun. But we had like a whole hour devoted to recorders.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, so
nothing
true.
against recorders, just not for Acorn School.
I thought it would have been so cute in the beginning, but I agree. You need more time than we have for that. And it would be really loud and overstimulating probably for our children.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, especially the 4 to 7 year olds.
Yeah. But we did music. So I'm just trying to flesh out. There was so much. There was foreign language, there was handwork, there was music, there's eurythmy, there's art class. Like you did art class every day along with you're doing art even in French class, you're doing art to learn French. It's incorporated in everything.
Oh, here's another question with that. Mm-hmm. So in Waldorf School, they really focus on like the rhythm of the day. Mm-hmm. Did you ever feel like rushed or frantic when you were moving on? Like, or was it more very smooth? And
I don't remember feeling rushed or anything. I do know the reading was a struggle, that I was struggling at first with that, but I'm guessing that was because of the dyslexia that they figured out.
Yeah.
So that is one thing that I remember being hard. Mm-hmm. But for the rest of the stuff, I think I really enjoyed it. I mean, I don't remember sitting there being like, God, I can't wait to go to recess or whatever it is. Maybe I felt that way sometimes, but I really
Did you feel that later on when we get to that point?
Oh my gosh.
Okay, yeah, well, we'll get there.
We're about to go to things change. This lovely magical childhood of wonder in education changes. Oh, the thing I didn't mention too, they don't give homework. And you're not being tested.
Wait, there's no homework?
There's not homework.
Not a single thing that they ask you to do at home?
You just play.
Oh, my.
You just go home and play and be with your family.
What
and
a
eat
novel
dinner.
idea.
And wow.
I mean, it makes sense seeing as you worked hard all day at school. Why are you going to go home and do more?
So there wasn't homework. And this part is really interesting, too. This is another thing. When my mom sent me that picture, you don't get grades. Maybe, I think in high school you do.
Okay.
But in early childhood and like the grades, the younger years, you're not graded. So you don't get an A or a B or a C because what they say, because the class sizes are small enough, the teacher knows you. Yeah, they understand your proficiency. Yeah. So they can tell what you're good at. They can tell what you're struggling with. They can understand how to help you. And instead of grades at the end of the year, you get a report that is actually each of your teachers write something about you. So Star did really well in this. She really enjoyed acting this year, and then sometimes it'd say like, over the summer, she needs to practice her times tables. It might mention something that you need to continue to work on, but I read through all of them and they were just lovely. I was reading like these teachers knew me.
Did your mom keep any?
Well, I have it. That's what she sent me with the picture. She just sent it to me. This. I should bring them because they are so interesting to read. And I read it feeling that.
Well, and as a public school teacher that used to have to write report card comments, I definitely would be interested in looking at that because I'm sure it'd be totally different than what my guidelines were for that.
They were lovely. I read them feeling like I wanted to cry. Like, oh my God, these people like
they truly care.
They truly care about me. And they invested in me and they knew me.
Yeah.
And so those things are really cool too because you're not being tested. You're not stressed.
Yeah.
Do I know the information? Am I right? Am I good enough?
Yeah.
All of that stuff is taken away.
Yeah.
One of the critiques that can be there is there's not a lot of like competitive sports in Waldorf education.
That can be done on the side.
Yeah. Some schools do end up getting a basketball team together or something like that. But it's really not a very competitive style of life. So
sense.
There's not a lot of that, but you can do it through club teams and stuff.
Okay.
So I think that's pretty much
that's the Waldorf
encompasses
school.
My Waldorf experience pretty well. I'll bring something up later if I miss it.
Then here's the transition. I know people are going to wonder, well, if this was so magical and awesome, what happened to where you had to change over to public school?
So when I lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and my mom wanted to go to school in Boulder, Colorado. So we moved across the country after fourth grade.
Okay.
So I went 2 years of kindergarten and then 1 through 4. So I did 6 years in Waldorf school. Mm-hmm. And then we moved to Boulder, Colorado. And the school system...
Yeah. So I'm grimacing because I'm like, oh dear, that must have been like a whiplash.
It was huge. Oof. The school system in Boulder, just for public education, is actually really good for public education. But even the best public education does not compare to the situation that I was in before. So I went to 5th grade at a public school, which is like right before middle school, right? Like it's the last of the grades. And wow, where do I start? So I was the new
Did you have to do a meet the teacher?
I don't even remember that.
Oh, okay.
But
we won't get too into the weeds.
No, I don't remember the details exactly.
I don't blame you because they change every year. So It's hard to.
I started, and I remember a lot more of the social stuff. So the social thing kicked in right away because I had my same group of friends for all this time, right? And then all of a sudden I'm thrown into 5th grade. And by 5th grade, kids are like, who's popular, who's dating who's, boyfriend and girlfriend, like all of that was going on. And I like had none of that before.
Yeah.
Like I was just thrown to the wolves of this like there was this like social economics
hierarchy,
that were happening.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I became very aware of that. I had homework and traditional learning styles. So math worksheets, everything was in grades and tests and all this stuff was different. And I remember in 5th grade, because my mom was in school too. So she was in massage school at the same time that I went to public school, and I had 2 hours of homework every night.
Yeah.
And had I been in public school my whole life, maybe it wouldn't have taken me 2 hours every night because I just wasn't used to.
Typically, it will take longer the higher up in the grades that you do. So you came in with a ton of homework going from nothing.
No homework to 2 hours a night. So then I'm in school all day. And then it's going from class to class to class. So there's a schedule. It's no longer a rhythm. It's no longer a flow. There's a schedule. I'm there every day. I move from things. There's all this social hierarchy. There's 2 hours of homework a night. And I did still do well. Like I think that I worked really hard because I wanted to please.
Survival instincts had
I was
to kick
trying
in.
to survive.
Yeah.
And so I did still get good grades and things like that. But I think I really struggled, but I don't think you really see that in my life until a few years later.
Okay.
Where the struggle was real, but in that year I was definitely surviving.
Yeah.
And I got into sports and I made friends and I became popular. Like that was so important, and I found a boyfriend and I did all these things because that's what everybody was doing. And I just was thrown into that's what we were doing.
Yeah.
So it was really intense. And one of the things and then I went to middle school and I started getting in trouble in middle school for sure. And we can kind of go into that. But one of the things I've been thinking a lot about with the public school education, you might have thoughts about this, is there's just no room there isn't room to, you might be bored, but it's because you're not interested in whatever's going on. You're still being talked at. There's no room. Like the point is to be dumb people down, in my opinion. You're not given the emotional support, the holistic support. You're not engaged. It's just you're putting a Band-Aid on any problems that might be happening. You're being thrown into a situation where there's no time to explore your own interests. There's no time to
the system doesn't really allow for the time. Just the way that the public school system is set up, it's just it's not really effective, or it hasn't really been able to nail the ability to, like, I feel like, and I can, other teachers can attest to this too. I feel like when you go in as a teacher and you go into your staff meetings or your trainings, they say things like, oh, we want to make sure that we are catering to all these different learning styles within children. They say that, but then when it comes down to executing it, it's just not really possible with the way that it's set up. So I feel like they always say that that's what they want, and they have like maybe at the beginning good intentions, but the way that they have it structured, it's not possible. Like it's just not. You have to just regurgitate
totally
information.
lost.
Yeah, of course, because it probably wasn't tailored to you because we don't have time for that with the 25 other students. You only have an hour to do it, so it's just like, it makes sense to me when I hear you say that, it just is that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I got good grades and I went through school and I did what you're supposed to do, but I hated it.
Yeah.
I hated it. I hated going there. I was bored. I was exhausted. I hated the homework. I hated the tests. I was anxious. I was stressed.
Well, yeah, because I'm sure
I was stressed.
Yeah, because we talked about in our previous about the in and out breaths. But I feel like sometimes with public school, it's just like you have a child, which is like a glass of water. And instead of stopping when it gets to the top, you just keep pouring and it's like overflowing. It's overstimulating. It doesn't matter. You're just constantly just pouring.
And then you have to disassociate.
Nothing. Yeah.
That's what I think happened is I disassociated. I was just like, okay, I'll get through this. But what the problem is like you have to do it for 12 years. Like it takes so long to get through.
And then if you go to college,
graduate, and I remember all the pressure and all the stress and all the anxiety that went on. It was just horrible. And by the time I graduated high school, I looked back and went, why did I even do that? Mm-hmm. Like I remember clearly and distinctly being like, what did that do for me? Mm-hmm. How did that help me in my life? It didn't. I got through it. Yeah. I endured the situation.
It's also wild too to like think about, kids go through the public school system and they're just told what they need to be doing, when they need to be doing it, how they need to be learning it. And then when they're done with high school, they're just expected to pick something to do for the rest of your life. Figure it out. But you've provided me with the answers this whole time. Yeah, I'm like, I have been told what to do for all of this time, and now I have to figure out what I want to do for the rest of my life. Like, that's rough.
You have no idea what you're interested in.
Because you haven't been able
follow
to.
your interests. Like, oh, look, we exposed them to all these different extracurriculars, or we exposed them to these electives so they can find their interests. But you can't. You are so stressed. Yeah. It doesn't matter. I was in a photography class. I like photography, but guess what? The whole time I'm in this dark room, I'm stressed about the test that I'm taking in an hour. Mm-hmm. I can't focus on photography, and if I'm passionate about it, if I love it, I'm freaking stressed. Yeah. And I just looked back afterwards and I remember being like, I shouldn't have done any of that. I remember looking at the bad kids that didn't care and they just passed and they got their D's and their C's and they went along their way and they had so much fun and they didn't do their homework and they weren't stressed. And I went, why wasn't I just a bad kid? Why didn't I just do what they did? This result is the same. We both graduated.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go on to college because, like you said, like I wasn't interested in that. I didn't even know what I was interested in. And so I was reflecting and talking to my husband about this recently because I don't feel like, and I had a good career counseling and I had a lot of fun and I did a lot of wonderful things and I loved it. But what's interesting is I've always loved sociology. And that's why counseling was really good for me. Mm-hmm. I really liked it because I liked understanding people and why they work and how they work. That's why I like some trash television, some reality TV. It's because it's sociology to me. It's so interesting to look how people live their lives. And I'm fascinated by humans. And what's really interesting is once I had Charlie and I was a stay-at-home mom and my husband agreed he was going to be working and I was going to stay home with the baby. Well, babies are a lot of work physically, but cognitively, they're not that much work. There's not that much to think about. Yeah. And so I spent those first few years of his life researching what I was interested in. I feel like I got to really follow my passions and look for what I truly, because I had the time, the space, the boredom. I read tons of books. I, did a lot of research on child development. That's where I got back into Waldorf interest because I really like unschooling as a philosophy. I really liked it. And one of the things I didn't really remember about Waldorf or know is how forced is it and how much are they, putting a lot on young children. And the more I researched Waldorf, the more I thought, oh, this really aligns with what my beliefs are with child development. And I just researched it from the adult point of view. Yeah. Which was like I had the child experience that was magical, but then
you had to flip it.
All the adult research lined up with what I believe, which was I wanted to provide my children a simple, beautiful, rich childhood. Yeah. And, so I think it's really interesting that for me, and then here we are with Acorn School, right? Yeah. I've had 5-6 years to be bored, to research what I was interested in, to, think my own thoughts. Yeah. Because I went straight and then I went into the workforce and I was working. I've had time to think my own thoughts. Yeah. And I just don't think children are given that time. Yeah. And that's what I love about homeschooling is that I want my children to have time to be bored, to think their own thoughts, to realize their own interests, to follow their own passions. And I think homeschooling actually provides the time. You need time. And there's no time in public school.
Totally.
There's no time. The summers are getting shorter. Recess is getting shorter, if at all.
Yeah.
You know, there's just no time for them to be kids and be free. And that's another principle that Steiner really talked about in his teachings, was the goal of child development, the goal of Waldorf education, the goal of an education is to become free, to become a free person.
Yep.
And if you really think about what that means, I just don't think the public school system provides any freedom of thought, of life, of emotion. So
I think our society would look a lot different if we had more of that mentality growing up.
I think if children, and I do think there's a revolution happening. I do think there's a change in culture that's happening that Acorn School is really on the front end of, and a lot of homeschoolers are going, this is not right what we've been doing. We are just producing robots and factory workers and children with low self-esteem and drug problems and obesity. And, we're producing this flock that isn't going very good.
Yeah, it's a lot of gunk.
So anyways, that's kind of wrapping it up, in my opinion, to go fast forward all the way to now.
Yep.
The reason I feel like I'm back in this Waldorf lifestyle is because the experience was good as a child, but then the more I've researched, the more I've been like, it makes sense.
It does.
It makes a lot of sense, especially for our culture today. So
wow. This was awesome. I'm so glad we got to dive into that, especially after our previous episode. I think having your insight was just treasure, honestly. You know that, because not a lot of people can say they did Waldorf school for 6 years, and you have that as all of your core memories, and then to go to public school and have that comparison. So no, this was a great episode, and we are happy to have you.
Thank you for listening to all my ramblings.
Yep. All right, everyone.